Everybody, welcome to the June 26th meeting of the 25 meeting of the COA Committee of the Raleigh Historic Development Commission. My name is Nick Fountain. I'm chair of the committee, and there are a few things I'll need to say before we get started, and I'll get through those as quickly as I can. First thing is to let you know that we're having to use, because of the pandemic, this remote electronic platform. We would far rather be where we can see all of you, and that's unfortunate, but we know that everyone needs to be knowing whether they can go forward with their project or not, and so we'll be moving ahead. So we know that the COA committee is a quasi-judicial body, and we're governed by the statutes and the city's Uniform Development Ordinance, and we have hearings, as you know, on whether or not a certificate of appropriateness should be granted. So we'll be carrying this out in accordance with the statutes, which is Session Law 2020-3, which was sort of hurried legislation allowing us to do remote meetings and hearings like this during this declaration of emergency and this ongoing pandemic. Everyone on the agenda was notified that we would be doing this through this remote process, and everyone has consented to using this process, and we will give everyone one more opportunity as their matter comes forward to object if they don't want to proceed this way. If anyone objects, if a party objects, then we will continue the matter until such time as we're able to resume hearings the old way, in the good old days that we don't know when we'll get back to. We've provided notice, maybe more than required to do this, but we put notice in the mail to all the property owners in 100 feet. We have also invited them to contact us, and we've let them know that this would be carried out in a remote process. So in addition to that, we've posted signs on the property, and most of you have seen those. We've published a notice on the city's website and in the press. So there's information in all of those about how to access and view the meeting as the meeting occurs. So anybody who wanted to speak or participate in today's hearing was required to sign up ahead of time, and information about how to sign up was provided to everyone as well, all those within 100 feet, and was also on the website. And so we have taken extra efforts to try to provide information to everyone. So the other thing that we did was require anyone who wished to participate to submit a copy in advance, so that anything that's going to be coming up would be known to the city, known to the participants, known to anybody who was interested in it. So everything has been posted in board docs for this meeting, and you should be able to click on that and get to the bottom of that screen and click on the agenda and see everything that we have going. So everyone was also sent, everyone's going to speak was sent a witness oath form before the meeting, so that anyone wanting to testify or submit evidence would have had to sign and return that oath form. But we'll nevertheless go back through that so that everyone's rights and duties and processes have been made clear to everyone, and that we all know that the witnesses have been sworn and are expected to be providing truthful testimony. So with that, I'll ask that the staff call the roll here, and then we'll go through and ask each person to introduce themselves. But let's first call the roll.
Nick Fountain.
Here.
Travis Bailey.
Here.
Laurie Jackson.
Here.
Janine McAuliffe is excused. Jimmy Team.
Here.
John Henshaw is alternate.
Right.
And he was muted, but he's here.
I saw his mouth move. All right, so I'll go around clockwise and start with myself, and clockwise the way it appears on my screen. So I'm Nick Fountain. I'm on about my fourth term on this commission. I'm the chair of this COA committee. I'm a lawyer, and I live in a Raleigh historic landmark, a mid-century house. And so that's all of those are the reasons why I'm a member of this commission. And I'll turn to Travis Bailey and ask Travis to provide the same information.
Travis Bailey, born and raised and grew up here in Raleigh. I lived in a historic home in the Boylan Heights Historic District.
Jimmy Team.
Jimmy Team, landscape architect emeritus. I live in a landmark house, and I also live in the the Blunt Street Historic District.
And John Henshaw. Well, you are muted, John. You're going to have to get your mic to work. There you go.
There we go. John Henshaw. I actually, for all practical purposes, for business standpoints, I'm a small business consultant, but I'm a history major from one of the oldest schools in the country, which is a National Historic Landmark.
All right. And Laurie Jackson.
I work for an architecture firm here in the city of Raleigh. I also live in a historic landmark that is located within the Glenwood Brooklyn Overlay Historic District.
Okay. So with that, the next task is to review the summary proceedings and then see about approving the agenda. The summary proceedings we have on today's agenda are 1023 West South Street, 20 North East Street, and 418 South Wallen Avenue. Has there been any request that any of those be moved to a full-blown hearing rather than a summary hearing? Any member of the commission or anybody else?
No one from the public has made that request. This is Tanya Tully speaking.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. With that, then we will ask. I'll come back to the summary proceedings, but let me ask that the agenda be approved at this time. Could I have one of you will nod and call you, and then we'll call on you to make that motion. Mr. Team.
So moved.
Is there a second? John Henshaw seconds the motion to approve the agenda. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 And I saw Mr. Bailey, Ms. Jackson, Mr. Dean, Mr. Henshaw, and I also vote to approve the agenda. So we have that. Now we'll walk through each of the matters on the summary proceeding list, and the first of those is 1023 West South Street, and each member of the committee has findings on that. I would entertain a motion to accept the findings in the staff comments as our findings of fact, and adopt those as our findings. Could I have a motion to that effect, Mr. Team?
Just for clarification, are you going to do this case by case?
Yes, I think I'll just do it case by case.
That's fine. So I move that based upon the information received, that we move approval for COA 0018-2020.
And adopt the staff report as our findings of fact.
Thank you. Yes, I'll accept that amendment.
All right, Mr. Henshaw, did I see you second the motion? All right, so there's a second to that. Any discussion?
I have one point of discussion on this.
Mr. Bailey?
According to our guidelines, and I've been familiar with this process after having to deal with several trees in my own house, Why is this considered a major COA if a replacement tree is being offered?
I'm sorry, you were broke up a little bit because of the background noise.
Why is this particular application required to be a major COA since a replacement tree is being offered?
This is Tanya Tully. I'll answer that. In our list of work in tree removals, what determines a major work versus a minor work, there are certain criteria that have to be met. For a minor work, for a tree removal to be a minor work, it needs to either be shown to be dead, diseased, or dangerous by an arborist and have a replacement tree offered. And there also needs to be clear evidence of damaging historic property and also have a replacement tree offered. Anything outside of that does then become a major work COA.
So, Mr. Bailey, I take that to mean that an after-the-fact matter, since you could not really realistically get that evidence of dead, diseased, and dangerous, is going to have to come to our committee.
Understood. Thank you for the clarification.
All right. So we had a consolidated motion with respect to the findings of fact and the action to be taken, and we had a second to that motion and discussion. I'll call the roll on that motion. Mr. Henshaw.
Approve.
Mr. Team.
Approve.
Ms. Jackson.
Approve.
Mr. Bailey.
Approve.
And I vote aye, and so that motion carries. And the next one is 620 Northeast Street, and and there's been no request that matter be handled as an evidentiary hearing, so we need essentially the same motion as we had on the previous. Mr. Team, would you make the same motion?
Upon the information provided in the application and recommendations of staff, I move that we approve COA 00402020.
And adopt the staff comments as our findings of fact.
Yeah, which was that I included that. Yes.
All right, good. Thank you. Mr. Henshaw, you second that motion?
Second.
All right, any discussion? All right, I'll proceed to a vote. Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
Mr. Team?
Aye.
Ms. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Henshaw?
Aye.
And I vote aye. And so that matter is approved. The next one is 418 South Boylan Avenue. And that was the one with the roof over a door and a rear deck and trellis. And Mr. Team, you make the same motion here?
Yeah, based on the information provided and staff's recommendations that we approve COA 00422020.
Second.
Henshaw seconds that motion. I'll call for a vote in absence of discussion. Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
And Ms. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Team?
Aye.
Mr. Henshaw?
Aye.
And I vote aye, and that takes care of the summary proceedings. And we'll now move to the evidentiary hearings. And the first one on our agenda today is 509 North Boundary Street, and staff will need to tell me who all will need to be sworn on this, or I guess I could try to call the names of everyone and administer the oath based on everyone I have on my attendee list, whatever, if you think that's appropriate.
So, Nick,
Yeah.
Tanya Tully here. First thing, can you start by affirming staff so that we don't have to be done for every case, please?
I'll certainly do that. And so, staff, if you will if you will mention your name so that we have a record of all the persons on staff, that would be Tanya Tully, and who else is on today since we can't see you?
I'm calling him out. Colette Canane.
I'm here.
And Aaron Morton.
All right.
I'm here.
So, Tanya, Colette, Aaron, you swear or affirm that testimony that you are about to give in the various matters we'll be considering today will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, say, I do. Tanya?
I do.
Aaron?
I do.
Colette?
I do.
All right, so you are all sworn. Now let's move to the question of the persons who desire to participate in 509 North Boundary Street. I can only see about 8 participants or attendees on my list.
That's okay. Nick, all of the people on the list that you have are here.
Okay, then I will ask that each of them respond to this oath in turn, and I will call the names based on that. And do you and each of you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give and the matters being heard will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Chad Wilkins?
I'm sorry, Nick, for this case, I'm sorry, I thought you had the list with divided up by cases.
No,
I'll call the names for this case.
No, mine aren't divided in that way.
Okay, my apologies. I've got JP Royer, Sally Van Gorder. Do you want me to just call their names for you?
Yes, that'll be fine.
Okay.
If you
We'll do
call
it
the
one
names, and then if Mr. Roy and the others will say, I do as to each one, then we'll have that done.
Okay. JP Royer,
I do.
Sally Van Gorder,
I do.
Joey Hester,
I do. I do.
Scott Fortenberry.
All right. Thank you. I didn't hear Scott.
Oh, he might be trying to unmute. I knew he was here.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? I do.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, then, would staff explain the proposal and what changes, if any, since last month?
Okay, give me just a moment. I'll get the presentation.
All right, so as a reminder from last month, I'm going to review the project, go through photos of the property, and then I'll tell you the new submitted materials. So this is case COA 0030-2020. It is 509 North Boundary Street in the Oakwood Historic District. And the project request is to construct an accessory structure. Next slide. This is a view of the property from North Boundary Street. Next slide. This is another view from Boundary Street a little to the east. Next slide. This is a view of the rear two-story deck, glimpsing into the backyard. Next slide. This is a view looking at the rear of the structure. Next slide. This is the backyard as we discussed last month, and the backyard extends into the area where the hammock is. I recall that being a question, and across towards the fence on the far side. Next slide. This is another view of the rear yard area. Slide. So the suggestion remains the same as last month. Discuss the use of corrugated metal siding, and should you choose to render a decision, we suggest approve with conditions. Next slide. There have been substantial changes to the application that you received a few days ago. That includes a revised written description, revised drawings, an updated accessory structure map, an inclusion of an example application that had been previously approved for 607 Boundary Street, and several photographs.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Royer, I think we would like to hear from you first, and then everyone else in favor, be prepared to follow that, and then we'll go to persons who have concern or opposition. So we'll let you walk through what these changes are and pick up with your responses and how you went about addressing the fresh questions that were raised last month. So, Mr. Royer, go ahead.
Okay, well, hello, everyone. There have been numerous changes to the application that I think resulted from hearing concerns from everyone at our last session. And one correction before I dive into the new proposal, there no longer is metal siding, so that one element that was mentioned at the beginning is no longer there. But the basic takeaway from last meeting from our side was some concern regarding the size and the siting of our proposed structure. And we've reduced the size both in footprint and volume by about 20%. And we've moved the location of the structure to closer behind the primary structure. So we still are proposing a one-story accessory structure with a below-grade basement. And, as staff has indicated previously, the location of an accessory structure behind a primary structure is typical in the district, and so we're trying to follow that pattern. And the location of an accessory structure close to property lines is also not uncommon in the district. And I've tried to show evidence of that in the attached context map. In the drawings, I'm not sure if you can see the final drawing, which is the site section. It shows how much the site slopes towards the rear. You can see the ground floor of the proposed structures about 14 feet below the sidewalk at the front, and the ridge of the new structure is about 2.5 feet above the sidewalk, 2 feet 8. Given that the proposed location is behind both 509 and 511, which are close to each other in terms of their side setbacks, the visibility, given how much is built along the street there and the slope of the lot, the visibility of the proposed accessory structure, I think, is not great, and I call that to your attention. In terms of the proposed structure itself, we've revised to a gable roof form, and maintain the metal roof, but have replaced the siding with fiber cement siding to match the house. And the ideas here are really to try to more closely relate to the primary structure on the lot. The maximum height from grade is about 18 feet to the ridge and 15 feet at the eave. The porch on the accessory structure faces the primary structure and is intended to continue the theme of outdoor spaces that you see in the primary structure. In terms of the ratio of built environment to open space, the proposed footprint of the new structure, including the porch, covers about 7.3% of the property. Combined with the footprint of the existing primary structure, the building pads, including the porches, cover 17% of the property. Currently, 90% of the property is open area. With the proposed design, about 83% of the property would remain open. This calculation includes exterior porches as built area. The above grade volume of the primary structure not including porches, is approximately 19,000 cubic feet, and the above-grade volume of the proposed accessory structure is approximately 8,500 cubic feet. So the accessory structure, the proposed accessory structure, is less than half the volume of the primary structure. And if you included the porches, the accessory structure would be about 1/3 the volume of the primary structure. And I bring that up just to show the relationships, and that the accessory structure, in terms of a built form, is deferential to the primary structure. I've included photographs of a few accessory structures that are on Boundary Street within a block and a half, which I think is what the guideline suggests as being nearby and well related. And the one precedent project that I'm sharing is primarily there to show an accessory structure of similar size. So those are my main points. And again, I think that the overriding shift here is really an effort to respond to some of the concerns I heard and we heard in our last meeting.
All right, thank you for that. Are there questions from members of the committee? Mr. Tame, you want to lead off?
I think, first of all, JP, thank you. Yeah, I think you've solved some problems from my point of view. I did note one thing, and this is probably going to go to Colette. I noticed that he has indicated that the tree on the property line is to be removed. Colette, can you confirm that that can be taken care of outside of this case?
What do you mean by outside of this case?
In other words, do we need to include that? He does not include information. He just notes on his plan, he says tree is hollowed out and is to be removed. That was not on the first plan that was submitted. And if my memory is correct, he is right. The tree is significantly hollowed out, but we normally would require a report from a arborist or landscape architect in order to remove the tree. So the question is, does he need to come back as a major work to have that removed?
This is Colette answering. So I guess that would be up to you if you would like to add that as a condition, to say that he referenced removing a tree, but information wasn't provided. You could choose to do that, or you could ask for it to be a new application. The power is in your hands.
Wow.
Would there be a way for me to provide a letter from an arborist as a condition?
Sure, if the committee chose to add that as a condition, and we're comfortable with that, absolutely.
All right. All right, thank you for that. And we'll think about what we need to do with it as we move along. Did you have other questions, Mr. Tame?
No, not at the moment.
All right, Laurie Jackson, you have questions?
I do not have any questions. I agree that you have resolved many of the issues that we discussed last month. And I have nothing else. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Henshaw, I don't know if you were here last month or not, but I think you were.
No, I was not, but the application seems fine.
Okay.
I reviewed what was online and the updates.
All right, Travis Bailey.
Echoing the other comments, that I appreciate the applicant resolving most of the problems that we had discussed during the last hearing.
Right.
The question I had for staff was as to the fiber cement siding. Do we approve, or have we approved accessory structures in the past to be fully clad in fiber cement?
This is Colette. Yes, you have. And this is a a newer constructed house as well, the primary structure. So that would be fitting if it were to match the house.
Perfect. Thank you. That's all.
All right. Okay, so yeah, and so I appreciate your having moved the, Mr. Royer, I appreciate you having moved the structure. Looks like it's as far west as you could and stay out of the easement. And it certainly relates to the main dwelling better. I'm sure it will cause you to have to rethink how you use and landscape the rest of the structure, but I think it's helpful here, and perhaps we'll address concerns from some of the other folks. We'll see when we get to that.
All right, thank you.
All right, so anything else, Mr. Royer?
No.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Anybody else want to speak in favor of this application?
So the two, Nick, this is Tanya here. The two people that we have signed up did sign up in opposition, but that was before they had the opportunity to see the changes. So I don't know what their status is at this point.
Then I'll just call on them and we will find out. And so
okay.
I'm going to start. I'm going to start with Joey Hester. I believe you were one of the ones.
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Well, Mr. Hester, you have seen, I guess you've had opportunity now to see these changes, and we'd be interested in your comments and reaction and what your position is now.
I have. At the moment, I still have significant concerns, and I believe I'll go ahead and read my statement for you.
All right.
So just for...
Before you start, is the statement, did you write the statement with this new proposal in mind?
I did.
Okay, thank you for that. Go ahead.
Okay. Just for a refresher, my name's Joey Hester. I live at 501 North Boundary Street with my wife. My backyard overlooks the location of the proposed accessory structure. The main structure footprint of the proposed accessory totals 632 square feet. RHDC staff appears to have accounted for the fact that the vertical height of the structure is appropriate in terms of its relation to the vertical height of the three-story main residence. Despite that accommodation, it appears that the building footprint amounts to 103% of the footprint of the primary dwelling, including porches. The structure's 706 total square feet amount to 76% of the overall footprint of the primary dwelling with porches. By all metrics except vertical height, it does not appear that the structure can be considered, and I quote, deferential to the principal building in siting size and scale, end quote, which runs afoul of introductory text in Design Guidelines Section 1.6. And since it is not compatible in size or scale to the primary dwelling, it runs afoul of Design Guideline 1.6.5. The proposed structure includes approximately 1,040 square feet of heated space. That total is 164 square feet larger than my primary dwelling at 501 North Boundary, 8 square feet larger than the primary dwelling at 618 Northeast, and only 26 square feet smaller than the primary dwelling at 616 Northeast Street. The proposed accessory structure is comparable in size or larger than 3 of the immediately adjacent primary homes. It therefore does not appear to be appropriate in terms of scale or size compared to several of the surrounding structures. Due to the existing storm drain easement, the accessory structure will not be constructed directly behind the primary dwelling, and most of the footprint of the building will be directly behind the adjacent home at 511 North Boundary Street. It therefore does not appear to be compatible with the historic relationship of garages and accessory structures and the accessory buildings to the main structure and the site and the district, which runs afoul of Design Guideline 1.6.6. This structure will have a basement that is constructed 8 to 9 feet below grade. I can only assume that heavy machinery will be required for the excavation of this area. The only construction access indicated on the design is on the western property boundary. This area is not an open driveway and includes several mature crepe myrtle and Bradford pear trees, which will not allow vehicle passage, the removal of which would violate Design Guideline 1.6.11. The only vehicle access for the open space behind 509 and 511 North Boundary is via the shared driveway between 511 and 515 North Boundary and between 618 and 620 Northeast. It appears that JP will require the permission of neighboring property owners in order to complete the excavation or even deliver pallets of building materials to the site. That is, unless the plan is to carry all construction materials to the site by hand. And lastly, I am aware that the RHDC cannot account for design limitations which do not fall explicitly within its own guidelines, but Section 1.6 refers to the fact that it is also, and this is a quote, it is also important to consider the impact of the proposed construction on the existing site and site features. The storm drain, which is located approximately 3 feet from the corner of the proposed structure, has had to be repaired by the City of Raleigh twice in the past 5 years. The impacts of the pipe's failure and the length of the city's remedy cost my family a great deal of money, including a need to restore my backyard landscape on several different occasions. I am profoundly concerned that the concrete walls of this structure's basement will be constructed a mere 36 inches from the side of the repaired pipe, which is now a plastic lining within the original concrete structure which was disintegrating. Notably, the only construction access for the proposed accessory structure crosses the pipe itself. My wife and I worry that the risks of this construction to that pipe are great, not only by excavation, but also by access. Having recently been granted permission to build an accessory structure of our own, we are by no means opposed to accessory structures on nearby properties. We simply believe that the structure which has been proposed does not appear to comply with many of the design guidelines as written. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Hester. Any questions for Mr. Hester from members of the committee? If you'll just raise your hand, I'll call on you. I can see your faces. All right, I hear none or see none. And so I will call on the other person that I believe would want to be heard, which was Mr. Fortenberry, Scott Fortenberry.
Yes.
If you will introduce yourself and then tell us what are your thoughts.
Yeah, this is Scott Fortenberry of 515 North Boundary. That is 2 houses east of the subject property. I had meant to, or thought I actually signed up in support, and that's where my position will be, as you see. But I have just 3 very quick items to mention. One is I reveal myself as the mysterious nearby neighbor who was mentioned several times in the May 28th meeting as having raised concern about a glitch in the notification process for this case. I appreciate the staff's efforts to follow up on my concern, and one reason for joining the meeting is to simply mark that loop as closed. Item 2, when reviewing JP's initial plans for the backyard structure, I had concerns about the proposed building size and opinions on a few other aspects, but none of my concerns apply to the updated design proposal. And I'm in support of the plan and look forward to JP and Sally returning to the neighborhood and executing their plan. Item 3 is the shared driveway between my house and 511 North Boundary is the likely conduit for certain equipment and materials to reach the job site. JP and I have reviewed the situation, and I'm in agreement on allowing the necessary driveway access. So those are my points. Unless there's a benefit to elaboration on any of these items, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, Mr. Fortenberry, following up on your point. You got a shared driveway there, and you are in, there is a house between you and this particular house. Do you know whether going through this shared driveway and then through the flag lot of the adjacent property is okay with that property owner as well?
Well, I certainly can't authoritatively speak for Mr. Zubizarreta. John Zubizarreta is the owner, but I can mention a few items. As just I happen to know that he has a decades-long friendship with JP, and in fact, they sort of built these houses in a cooperative project. 509 and 511, and so from that standpoint, I'd be surprised if there was reservations. The other item I can mention is that JP, outside of the COA process, has kept John and me regularly informed of the project plans. John's currently, residing outside the country, but again, each set of drawings as they occur, JP has provided informally to John Zubizarreta and myself, and he kept us in the loop. So those are the reasons that I would be confident that John is not in opposition, but I obviously can't authoritatively speak for him.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that. Are there questions for Mr. Fortenberry from anybody on the committee? I see none. All right. Is there anybody else online that wants to be heard either for or against this proposal? Are there questions for any of the speakers or the applicant from anybody on the committee? Do any of you have any questions for staff? Because the next step would be for me to close the public hearing. After we would not be presumed to be asking questions of anybody, staff included. All right, then I'm going to close the public hearing, and we'll turn to discussion internal to the committee. And I'll ask each of you in turn, what do you think we need to do here, or how do you think is the best way to proceed based on what we have this month compared to last month? Mr. Team, you got any thoughts?
My major concern from the last time, from the last meeting, was the location and the implication that its location relative to the house next door made it okay and the property lines weren't important. And that gave me some concern, which a lot of this has been taken care of, so I won't spend some time, but I could go through some gyrations about, for instance, if it got approved because it related to the other house, does the other house now lose its chance to have an accessory structure because we granted it there? We won't go there, but I think that the fact that the house is, the accessory structure has been pulled over and a portion of it is in fact aligned with the house, and also acknowledging that this is an atypical lot. So I think that it's met that requirement of being behind the original house. And, frankly, if the house next door is going to finally put in an accessory structure, they'll be in the backyard, probably in close proximity. And that's a typical relationship in the neighborhoods, to have accessory structures along a rear lot line, which are close to one another. And I understand the concerns that have been expressed, particularly around the construction issues. I will note one thing that without having a detailed survey of the site, I am seeing the structure near an easement, the drainage easement for the pipe, but not necessarily next to the pipe. Typically, those easements, the pipe is centered on them, so I expect there is more room between the actual pipe and the proposed structure. So with all that being said, I'm inclined, based on the improvements and changes to the application, to support this.
All right, any discussion, Ms. Jackson?
I agree. I think in light of the 20% in volume reduction, the change in materials from from metal siding to fiber cement siding, the shift in the location, the revised roof form, all of the concerns that I had with previous application have been resolved. I will note that in terms of the tree removal, I do not think it is necessary to condition an arborist's letter on the health of the tree. But again, we can discuss that. I would be comfortable letting staff resolve the addition of tree removal at their discretion. That's all.
We'll probably need to address it one way or the other, or else another COA would be required. So whatever we do, we'll probably have to say something about it. Travis Bailey, I lost your video on my screen, but so I'm going to call on Mr. Henshaw next to see if he had any discussion before we get to a motion.
And no, I think my personal feeling is on the tree, if it's indeed hollowed out, which Jimmy had noted, that, I think, if we want to put that as a condition for approval, then that would be acceptable. That's my feeling, and size and everything else, the applicant seems to have made the appropriate adjustments to the previous concerns. So,
All right, Mr. Bailey, any comment?
None.
Okay. So yeah, frankly, I might have personally liked the previous design myself, but this one is certainly more in keeping with the traditional roof forms in the neighborhood, and even if there are shed roofs on some accessory structures in the neighborhood, in this situation with this unusual configuration on the property, the use of an A roof, I think, is a big help on this. And so those are sort of my thoughts. And I think moving it over close to the easement, I assume the easement is 15 feet wide, and I doubt the pipe is 15 feet in diameter. So we're probably okay there. Would Laurie Jackson, you want to try a motion?
Sure. I move that based upon the evidence that has been presented in the application and during the evidentiary hearing, the committee finds that the proposed construction of an accessory structure is not incongruous in concept according to guidelines sections 1.3.7 through 9, 1.3.12, 1.6.6, 7, 8, 1.6.10, 11, and 12. Further,
And the following facts.
and the following facts 1 through 17.
All right. If you raise, we need a second to that motion. One of you raise your hand, I'll call on you. All right, Mr. Bailey, you second the motion?
Yes.
All right, so the motion has been made and seconded. Now, if we'll take a moment, let's look back through these facts, because I think some of the new information may have come after some of these comments were written.
I think as far as fact number 1, we can strike on page 2 of the staff report the portion of the sentence that says the proposed location of the accessory structure has the appearance of being located in the rear yard of the neighboring house and at the rear of the driveway for 515 North Boundary.
Does that mean you would just stop paragraph 1 or before the word however on page 1?
I welcome friendly amendments, but I think, yes, I would stop there.
Okay. Anything?
Well, it is.
Excuse me, go ahead.
Sorry. I think we could clarify that it appears to straddle a portion of the property line. Or maybe to simplify, we could say the proposed location of the accessory structure has the appearance of being located in both the rear yards of the subject property and the neighboring house at 511 North Boundary.
Okay. All right. Mr. Team had something he wanted to say, Mr. Team?
Yes, I want to add, and I guess it's going to be under under A. I'm looking for where it belongs. I want to put a fact in that the applicant proposes to remove a mulberry tree. I don't know if he noted it or not. I think I had that in my notes, but he's proposing to remove a tree on the west property line. I would like to have that added in as a fact.
That'd be number 18, I think.
Okay. And then under the conditions that the applicant will work with staff to get an approval for removal of the tree.
I accept.
All right. Now, Laurie, with respect to paragraph 8 of the number 8 of the findings, we're talking about the roof form as shed.
Oops.
We'll need to clarify that, correct that up.
Yes. I think that, I don't know, do we need to go through each fact individually and note it based on the updated information? Because all of these facts are...
Staff has circled the ones that need changing. Do you want Colette to run through them? I think that we
Yes,
should.
Yes. Colette, please do.
All right, Colette here. So I have circled number 2, the distance amounts will need to change. I believe it is 31 and a half from the the easternmost property line. And goodness, let's see, 52.9
Tanya here.
from the rear.
Tanya here, Tanya Tully here, I just had a thought that what we could do is just quickly go through and note the ones that are changed. And if you're okay, you could let staff adjust the numbers to be correct if needed, that you would then get a chance to look at when you approve the minutes later.
Yes, that would be great. Thank
So
you.
at least we know which ones need to change, but that then the details we can go back rather than being super crazy today.
All right, that's fine. We'll try to do it that way, and then everybody would need to look at that in minutes when they come through. And,
All right, so this is Colette again. So I said number 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, 12, 13, 15,
what,
14,
wait a minute, what came after 12?
13, 14, and 15.
Okay,
And then you added an 18.
that's right. Okay, does everybody understand that that the various numbered paragraphs will need to be, most of that is changing the numbers to make them accurate? Mr. Team, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I have 2 other things I need to add to the tree removal, and that is that we would waive the 365-day delay for the removal of the tree, and that a new shade tree, 3 inches, minimum 3 inches caliper would be planted on the site, location to be determined between the applicant and staff.
Well, I think both those things are appropriate, but I think they go in the next motion.
Oh, you're right. Thank you. Just practicing.
Okay, good. Everybody understand this motion now with the 18 findings? Any further discussion? All right, I'll call for a vote, and I'll do that by calling the roll. Mr. Team?
Aye.
Ms. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Henshaw?
Aye.
Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
And I vote aye, and the motion carries. Ms. Jackson, you have a follow-up motion.
I do. I move that an application for the certificate of appropriateness be approved, subject to conditions 1, 2, 3, And the addition of condition 4, that the 365-day delay for tree removal not be imposed. And per Jimmy's suggestion, a replacement tree be provided at a location on site to be determined by the applicant working with staff to resolve.
All right, does everybody understand the motion? We need a second to that motion. Mr. Team, you second the motion?
I second, and I wanted to clarify, the tree would be a 3-inch caliper minimum 3-inch caliper shade tree, and that the applicant will work with staff, for removal of the tree as required under the procedures that we follow.
And here, just want to clarify that you're approving as amended.
That's right. Well, yes, the approving that as amended with the modifications and the new plan.
Yes.
Everybody understand the motion, which now been seconded. The amendment was acceptable to Ms. Jackson. And I'll call for a vote on that motion. Mr. King?
Aye.
Ms. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Henshaw?
Aye.
Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
And I vote aye. And so we thank all the neighbors. We thank Mr. Royer for the diligent work on hearing what the members were saying last month, and for that matter, hearing a lot of what the neighbors were expressing concern about it. It's a challenging piece of property and with a lot of topographic issues, but we are concluding that it is not incongruous, and on a more practical level, it's not going to impair the enjoyment of nearby properties or the property values in the neighborhood either. So with that, we'll move on to the next one. And the next project is 1102 West Lenore Street. That is Mr. Joe Dillon. And who is to speak on this one? Who on your list, Tanya, other than Mr. Dillon?
Marcia and Henry Lenz.
Okay. Yeah, their last name didn't appear on my list, so thank you for saying that. Okay, with Mr. Dillon and Ms. Lentz, if you will be sworn at this time, and I'll ask of each of you, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give and the matter being heard will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Mr. Dillon?
I do.
Mr. Lentz?
I do.
Mrs. Lentz?
I do.
Okay, thank you all. And now I'll ask staff to explain this proposal.
All right, this is Erin Morton. This is KCOA 0015-2020 for 1102 West Lenore Street in the Boylan Heights Historic District. The proposal is to install a fence. Next slide. This is a fairly new construction house, as I should have pointed out on the map from the last slide. GIS has not caught up yet to show the appropriate footprint, but this is the house that sits on the site currently. This is a view of the front of the house from West Lenore Street. Next slide. This is a view of the rear of the house looking towards the back alley. Next slide. This is a view looking across the yard toward the neighbor's house, still in the backyard. Next slide.
Before you go, that's a view looking north?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And this is a view standing in the rear alley, looking back at the rear elevation of the house.
And there is a garage structure fronting on the alley. Next slide. And this is just a view from the other side of the rear of the lot. The north neighbor is off to the right of this photograph. Next slide. The staff suggestion is to approve with conditions. Next slide. Oh, go back one. And we do have some new information provided by the Lenses, not by the applicant, that's been provided to the commissioners and to the public on board docs.
Okay, thank you for that. And Mr. Dillon, I'll ask you to now speak and explain your proposal and address any concerns expressed by staff and to the extent you can, concerns that you anticipate may be raised by Ms. Lentz. Mr. Dillon?
Oh, sorry, I was just unmuted. I don't know that I have anything to add to staff's report. You know, it's a very standard 6-foot privacy fence. You know, I went to great, I made an effort to engage a builder that has done work in the neighborhood. I based it off approval on Kinsey Street 401 in particular that has been approved by this board in the past. You know, I was careful with the design to make sure that it was consistent with what is allowable in the historic district. And I think that the information that will be presented by my neighbor, had a chance to speak with him as he was outside looking at the area for the proposed fence. And I believe that we have come to an agreement on where the plan or the fence can be installed that will not impede his access to the rear of his property, that is consistent with where he has had a survey done at some point in the past. And, you know, I will continue to work with him to make sure that, you know, the setup and location of the fence is amenable to both of us.
So if you don't mind, just tell us what that changes about your project.
We will move so the proposed fence will be moved closer onto my property, slightly closer to the, I have to have him explain, but apparently there was a disagreement over the property line that arose when this house was built, before I was involved and before I purchased the home. I think that he will present what he thinks is, or what the survey that he received years and years ago. You know, the only difference is it will be about 6 inches further on my end of the property than was initially proposed.
So it'll just sort of all move 6 inches south.
That's right. And just on one side, you know, there's a structure, what I think is a garage or some sort of, you know, my neighbor can explain it, whatever the structure is, but he wants to make sure that he maintains access to the rear of that. And he has since put up a couple of barriers on his property line. And so, you know, I spoke with him and mentioned that we could move the fence slightly over to accommodate his access to that structure.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Does anybody on the committee have any questions for Mr. Dillon? All right. I saw no raised hands. Ms. Lentz, are you both going to speak or just one of you? The one who wants to speak, come forward, and then if the other needs to supplement, we can certainly arrange that. Who wants to talk first?
All right. I will go ahead and speak. My name is Henry Lenz, and thank you for the opportunity you heard here. I do have just a very brief little statement. I guess I should explain it here. While we would support a fence along our common border with the 1102 North, Lenore Street property with Joe's property, we just want to make sure that the placement of the fence does respect our property line as shown on our survey and the way it's referenced in our deed. The survey listed in the COA, it does encroach on our property by about 9/10 of a foot, the survey by Staley Smith, and it is actually not the survey that's listed on the deed for 1102. When Contact 8 sold the property, they reverted back to the 1973 William Cropper survey for some reason. But as Joe mentioned, we spoke out there, and he's fine with going ahead and putting the fence over to make sure it does respect our property marker there. And as long as that's done and our rights are respected, we are absolutely fine with the fence being placed there.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Lance?
Well, we do want to make sure that they're careful about the tree that's close to where the proposed end of that fence is.
All right.
Been in the bamboo thicket for about 25 years, so it's not often seen.
We will. All right. We will look at that matter. Thank you for mentioning that. So, Mr. Lentz, a couple of things. Me being a lawyer, well, first of all, the guy that drew this deed wasn't me. I noticed that it's somebody named Fountain, and it wasn't me. But I will say this: many times, Ms. Lentz, when a seller such as Mr. and Ms. Caraway, when their attorney draws a deed, they typically rather than overstate things, they will go back and use whatever it was that was the description that came to Mr. and Ms. Caraway that then made its way to you guys. And so that would be the reason why it might have gone back to referencing the ancient maps of Boylan Heights and the like.
Okay, well, we had it surveyed 30 years ago, and the iron pipe is right there referenced on both our deed and the survey.
Right.
And
so that may be fine. Surveying in Raleigh was pretty good in 1989, but that doesn't mean that things cannot be done more precisely today. But anyway, that's really beyond the scope of this proposal. But there are reasons why the thing could be off a little bit one way or the other. And I'm glad you got. Go ahead.
We fully understand that, and Joe and like I said, we had talked about this prior to the meeting. After that last one was canceled due to notification issues, so I do believe we have it hashed out. And if he's fine with moving the fence inward some, to go ahead and respect that property marker, I'm fine with the fence being there.
All right, thank you for that. All right, Mrs. Lance, do you wish to be heard?
I think we're good.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any questions for any of these folks from members of the committee? See no sign.
None that I can think of off the top of my head, no. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anything from members of anything you want to ask staff? All right, then I'm going to close the public hearing. We'll turn to internal discussion. Mr. Thiem has his hand up.
And this, whether it's staff or Raz, I don't know, do we need to add something in as a finding of fact on the staff report with regard to the discrepancy that has been noted by the adjacent property owner? And I think my second part of that is that, and I guess I'm a little confused. I understand that the adjacent neighbor was concerned about a reference to an old map, and Nick, your answer was very appropriate because normally they'll run back. I didn't hear any testimony with regard to the fact that the recent surveys for the two properties match, that they have a common property line, and that is not in disagreement. And I know we're not into dealing with this stuff, but I also want to make sure that there's some clarity around how that's going to get resolved.
Well, so I would respond, Mr. Thiem, by saying that I don't know that it is the purview of this committee to cause people to have to sort out a potential boundary issue. I think as long as we simply make clear that the fence is going to be located on the applicant's property, and then we just step away from that, I think we'll be well advised. But that's my view.
Tanya Tully's going to speak up here also. Generally speaking, with the COA process and also any other city processes, boundary disputes is a civil matter outside of our jurisdiction. Just another way of saying what you just said. But.
Okay. So Mr. Raspberry had his hand up.
I would just say this. It might be appropriate to just add as a finding that the committee has no authority to fix or to determine property boundaries, and nothing in the decision shall affect that issue of fixing the property boundaries, the north-south property boundaries that we're talking about.
Or deciding where it is.
Exactly, fixing the location of that line.
All right. Okay. Thank you for that. Mr. Henshaw?
I'm sure from a legal standpoint, everything I would say is great, but I think if we start adding these things, it's just going to muddy the water the next time something comes up. We don't deal with property lines.
We're trying to make sure we don't.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you put it in here, then somebody's going to come back and go, well, they put that in here on the last time. All I'm saying is that people love to go in to dig in, and they'll bring up issues that are irrelevant, in which we have no say in.
All right, Mr. Bailey?
I was just going to add, as part of the research I did into this application, that this house is one of the 2 houses that was recently built in this area when the lot was subdivided. But as pertinent to the conversation, we're not involved in determining property lines here.
Right. Yeah, I know. We all saw that the first slide had a pre-existing house and a line going right through it. So, as we rode by and looked, we remembered didn't used to look that way on that street at all. I'm interested in getting a motion here. We've got other ones to work on. Mr. Bailey, would you proceed?
Yes. I move that based on the information contained in the application and discussion, installing a fence is not incongruous according to guidelines sections 1.4.8, 0.10, 0.11, and suggested facts 1 through 6.
Second from Mr. Team. Any of you inclined to add additional language based on the comments of our lawyer?
I will. Should we add that as a suggested fact?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Add suggested fact 7. The RHDC COA committee is not involved with determining property lines.
Tanya Tully speaking up here. I would also add that these are no longer suggested facts. These are now your facts.
Right.
So noted.
I didn't hear him say that. If he said that, I'm sorry. Okay. So you heard the motion with the amendment. Is there a second to that motion?
Yeah, I already seconded and I'll accept the modification.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any further discussion? All right. I'll call for a vote on the motion. Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
Ms. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Team?
Aye.
Mr. Henshaw?
No.
And I'll vote aye, and the motion carries. Do you have the follow-up motion, Mr. Bailey?
I'm doing this from memory because I lost the cheat sheet. So I move that a certificate of appropriateness be issued with the following conditions, and that the committee approve the application with the following conditions. Details and specifications for A through B be provided to and approved by staff prior to issuance of a blue placard.
All right, is there a second to that motion? Mr. Team seconds the motion. Any discussion? Anybody see the need? Anything else?
Quick note, I think again, we've got the situation where what the finding of fact is not accurate, based on the information that we just heard. So can we, amend fact number 1, to reflect the approximately 6-inch offset of the fence to allow Mr. Lentz access to his property? And I would suggest, friendly suggestion that we let staff resolve that with the applicant.
I'd accept the amendment.
All right, so you're actually going back into the findings of fact to make that change.
Staff would suggest that it's not necessary. I'm sorry, Tanya Tully here. Fact 1 does say it's along the property lines. Your fact 7 basically says RHDC doesn't say where the property lines are.
But what Ms. Jackson's raising is a slightly different thing, is that to reflect in the facts that the parties have resolved to adjust the location to be sure that the neighbor can access his accessory building.
Okay, the other piece, well, I think, okay, I will talk about this later. Staff will step down.
No, I don't mind. I need to hear what's on your mind. We'll get it right, Tanya. Go ahead.
Well, I think when it comes to an enforcement issue for staff, 6 inches here or there for the location of a fence is not something that we're going to catch. So making it a condition and making, having to perhaps draw something differently puts an undue burden on everyone involved.
Well, I was content that it said along the property line and which had enough elbow room in it, in my view.
Okay, well, on that note, apologies. I realize perhaps I inserted that at the wrong time during the process. And I guess that the responsibility falls with the property owner to work out the location of the fence with his neighbor and not to staff. I retract.
All right, so we have a motion, and I think we had a second with respect to the approval of the issuance of the COA. And I'll call for a vote on that motion. Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Henshaw?
Aye.
Mr. Team?
Aye.
And I vote for it, and that motion carries. So, Mr. Dillon, thank you for your good work with your neighbors. And you all will be working with staff from here to move forward and get the thing done. So thank you all for coming. And we will now move to 3108 Hilmer Drive, the Crabtree Jones house. The applicant is Mr. Hobbs. Is there anybody other than Mr. Hobbs that is indicated a desire to speak?
No.
Okay, Mr. Hobbs, I'm going to administer an oath to you, and I'll ask for your response when I get through. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give to the members of this committee and the matter being heard will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Mr. Hobbs?
I do.
Thank you for that. Now, staff, would you explain the proposal?
Excuse me, can I interject?
Yes, ma'am.
I have a disclosure to make. I am a member of the Board of Directors of Preservation North Carolina, as is the applicant, Mr. Hobbs. I feel that I can hear this case objectively, but I wanted to disclose that information.
Well, thank you for that disclosure, and it's fine for you to participate as long as you feel that your acquaintance with Mr. Hobbs won't impact your objectivity in making this decision. So staff, will you explain the proposal? We got cut off.
Sorry, I thought I had already shared it while she was speaking. Let me try that again.
No, Colette was the one that was on the contact on this one.
Oh, I know, but I'm the one that's supposed to show you the pretty pictures and,
Okay, well,
and
let's
run the
see.
machine. Let me try that again.
Yeah, let's see some pictures.
There you go. Sorry about that.
All right, Colette here. This is case COA 0047-2020 for 3108 Hilmer Drive. It is a Raleigh historic landmark, the Nathaniel Crabtree Jones House. There is a lengthy project description. It is overall a master landscape plan, including the construction of walls, the installation of new planting beds, the alteration of a front walk, the installation of pathways, alteration of driveway, installation of fences, the removal of pathways, the removal of a patio, the removal of a tree, planting trees, installing a trellis, and installing drainage. Next slide. This is a view of the property from Hilmer Drive. Next slide. This is a view of the front of the house from a little further into the driveway. Next slide. This is a view from near the same location, but looking back towards the garage at the end of the driveway. Slide. This is beyond the garage, looking southeast into the rear yard. Next slide. So this is from just about in front of the shed that you saw in the previous photo, looking back towards the garage, the northwest. If you'll go back one slide. Yeah, the tree that you see there is the tree that is proposed to be removed. Next slide. So this is a view of the existing patio space that is proposed to be removed, looking west back towards the house and Hilmer Drive. Next. This is a closer view of that portion of the house that you saw in the previous photo slide. A little closer to that same view. Next slide. And this is looking back towards the shed, looking east. Next slide. Here's a detailed view of the existing shed. Next slide. And going around that shed. Next slide. So staff recommended the discussion of the proposed accessory structures, and pending the results of that discussion, the recommendation is to approve with conditions. Now keep in mind that the recommendation and the staff report were written prior to the receipt of all of these materials that were sent to you on Tuesday, and the new information that was provided includes a response to staff comments, information on the zoning buffer, drawings of the fence, detailed elevation drawings for the accessory structures, and a drawing noting tree location with species.
Okay, Mr. Hobbs, we will hear from you now.
Yes, thank you. This is Matt Hobbs. With my family, we're happy to be sort of stewards of this house, and we've continued to work on the house inside and out, but as you saw from the photographs, we haven't really gotten around to doing much with the yard. So we're excited to be working on the landscape now. And we really love the house, and we really love where we are in the middle of growth, but we're also to the extent of our capacity, we want to be able to sort of manage the impacts of what's going on around us with the heavily trafficked Wake Forest Road and all the commercial development that you could actually see in those photographs. And that's really the explanation for, largely the explanation, well, the main explanation for why we want the structures built back there. The other important component is just that the existing shed is creating the axial alignment with that landscape design that has been presented. I don't really have a lot more to add that's not already in the proposal in all the materials I've submitted, but we're excited to continue to improve this property so that it will stay a great place for the whole community. So happy to answer any questions, provide any more details, work with staff for anything I haven't provided to this point.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there questions of the applicant from members of the committee? Mr. Ting?
I may have some questions, but I actually, in order to make sure, be clear about what I'm asking, I really need to get some direction from staff. So I'll put that aside, and if you want to go talk to, other people in support or otherwise.
Well, that's fine. I don't mind if you get the clarification from staff so we can then follow up with questions for the applicant.
Yeah, okay. So, and I'll just let anybody on staff who feels like they can comment. So, what I'm acknowledging is that the house was moved into a subdivision on a lot that was occupied originally by, a ranch house. So the site had no context with regard to it. Unlike other landmarks that we have that are standalone, where the house was actually built on the lot originally. And so what I am challenged with in terms of trying to look at this is, and one of the things that I'm looking at is the issue of trees. And so, it feels like the house just, it was moved on a lot. I'm not clear when all of a sudden the lot became part of the landmark status of the house. I realize this sounds confusing, but, if there had been a report for the house, on others, the site was designated, the house and site were designated together. In this case, the house was already, a property, and then it just got moved to a lot.
Well, it had to be redesignated and approved all over again, I think, after it got moved.
Well, I'd like staff to comment on it, because do we treat this just as if the whole property is a landmark property? Is that the way we treat it?
Colette here. Yes, and I tried to reference that in some of the facts. When the property was redesignated as a landmark in 2015, the new designation report did mention the current landscape and the existing shed and the garage that had remained from the previous house. But the landmark report, as I said in fact 4, noted that the garage, outbuilding, and landscape elements that existed to the previous house and are currently on the parcel are not significant and do not warrant preservation. So I guess you can take that as you want as you discuss the site elements and the proposal. But it is referenced in the report as being present but not significant to the landmark nature of the property. Does that make sense?
You're breaking up.
I guess a disclosure. I guess in a way a disclosure piece is I was personal friends with the man who was the caretaker for this house for 40 years. And I've spent a great deal of time, and I was very familiar with the house in its original location. Raz is smiling. I think he probably has some similar background on this. And so I am trying to divorce myself from the original context of the house that I knew about before it got moved. And you know, for I guess among other things, those series of trellises out front, I found, or at least my sense is that for a plantation type house of this character, that you would not have those more utilitarian features in front of the house. I realize I'm opening it up for discussion, and frankly, that is my purpose. Is as I'm trying to understand this because the house is in a location which is totally out of context with where it was originally, and so I'm looking for some standard for flexibility because, frankly, we've never dealt with a plantation home on a site this big. I mean, maybe the closest to it would be Montford Hall, but that was a totally different. You know, that was built in an urban environment.
Tanya,
Yeah, so help me out here.
Tanya, before you start, would you just lead off by telling us what was sort of the content of the application for status for the house after it got moved?
well, Tanya now is going to revert back to Colette because she read it most recently. Tanya Tully here. What I'm going to add is that is your challenge in reviewing this. It is not about what is being changed of the existing landscape as much as are the proposed features appropriate to the site and house. And it is a brand new situation where the entire property is landmarked, but the only contributing feature is the house itself. And so that actually, the flexibility you have is whatever you decide is appropriate.
I'm going to make a suggestion then that we go through with comments or questions to the applicant, and then perhaps this needs to go into discussion because I do need I need to hear from other members of the committee. I hope you're all struggling with the same issues that I'm struggling with on this. So, Nick, if you're okay, I'm going to go ahead and talk to Mr. Hobbs for a second and just ask some questions.
No, that would be fine. We need to do that, and I knew that the focus of this application is landscape, and I thought I ought to lead off with you.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Hobbs, you still there?
I'm here.
Excellent. So, a couple of things that are going to come.
Although it's freezing up on me, I don't know what's happening.
I'll wait.
It seems to be working now.
Okay, and thank you for letting me know. So one of the things that I'm looking at is with all the trees that are being impacted. There hasn't been anything that's been noted with regard to tree protection plans for the critical root zone areas. And there's a fair amount of construction and demolition that's planned for that. So I will be looking, because normally we would have a plan as part of our review for this submission. Staff may have some guidance here. That's one of the reasons I was trying to determine whether this site, how critical this site was. But at this point, I'll be looking to recommend that a tree protection plan be prepared in order to ensure that the trees with root zones within the area proposed for improvements will be approved. Yes.
So the tree protection plan was proffered that would be worked out with staff, subject to our review. And just as you're a bit at sea, I'm a bit at sea of knowing what this committee is going to approve. So there's some of those details like construction staging and things like that seem to be putting the cart before the horse if I don't know what I'm building.
And obviously, because one of the questions, and my guess is you're not going to build this whole cloth.
It depends. Probably not.
Okay. Well,
to the point of the trees, we are much of the design is structured specifically around avoiding the trees with the way the accessory structures are situated. And in the other portions of the work, we're more or less just going to remove the concrete off the top, and we're not planning to do a lot of disturbance in the back. So we're really not planning to have much in the way of tree impacts. Other than the one tree. The one tree will be severely impacted.
All right, Mr. Team, go ahead.
So the challenges for us and with a tree protection plan, we're not looking at just the fact that a structure is like right on a tree, but we're trying to protect the root zone. That's really one of the critical pieces of this, is making sure that the root zone is not disturbed. One of the things that I noticed, particularly in the backyard area, was that there was a slope that ran off, particularly down in the northeast corner of the site where you had proposed, that's the fire pit, if I'm correct, that area over there. And so what I was curious about was whether you were planning to do what level of grading work, and there was a grading and drainage plan that had been submitted, but the plan only had drainage information. There was no proposed grading work showing changes in grade or existing topography on the plan.
So I can address the fire pit specifically. That was just something that the landscape architect put on there. That is not intended to be put on there, and just, you can exclude that from there. There's not an intention to do any grading over in that area at all.
Okay. And you know that tree, there's a, I'm looking at my notes here. I think that's the sugar maple that's just off the corner of the existing accessory building there, which is also near that area. So thank you for that. We'll note that that would not be part of the plan. I think there are going to be some other trees, though, that may be impacted. So we'll try to figure out how to deal with that. There's a couple of other comments I wanted to make to you. One of them is a jurisdictional piece for us. We are not in the position of making or reviewing and approving anything within a public right-of-way. And that area in the southwest corner that you're showing that goes to the curb is actually in the public right-of-way. And so just be aware that that would be excluded, and it would be between you and the city of Raleigh to resolve how that.
Understood. Got it.
Just so you don't get in trouble. The other piece, which is purely a suggestion for you to take a look at, and this has to do with your brown turkeys, figs, not really turkeys, but figs. What it appears to me from my measurements on the plan is that those appear to be in a very narrow landscape area, which puts them just a few feet from the property line, and based on my measurements, about 3 feet off the edge of the driveway. And I'm personally familiar. In fact, I went out in my backyard to measure a turkey fig that's been in place, which has about a 16-foot spread on the canopy of the tree, and the branches are probably 7 feet above ground. And so I think the trees are very appropriate for the site. My concern is the proximity to the driveway and the proximity to the fence could prove to be a problem down the road. And so just letting you know that from my background and experience. And that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there questions from other members of the committee? Mr. Henshaw, you got anything?
I just want to make a note. After you mentioned the 7 feet above ground, you cut out on me, so I missed the rest.
I'm just concerned that the trees are in a very narrow space.
Understood.
And I don't know how you're going to maintain them. Some people just allow the brown turkeys to get large. That's what my wife did. She got it out of hand. You have to get a ladder now to collect any figs, so you can keep them trimmed back densely if you want to. But
I'll discuss that with my architect.
yeah, just make sure that what you're buying into is not going to cause you a problem later, and you're going to have to chop the trees up in order to drive in. That's all my concern is.
Sounds like we have shooting going on. Hope not. Ms. Jackson, you got any discussion or questions for the applicant?
I do. I just want to make sure that I understand fully what's going on here. So I'm just going to summarize what I think is happening. And Matt, if you could correct me or add any additional information as needed. So the house, the historic house was moved to this lot. There was an existing garage and an existing what is called one-story concrete and frame structure at the back of the lot. And so you are leaving those, and you are proposing to add on to that existing structure at the back of the lot, connecting it by an arbor to a new future building, sort of a line of buildings along that rear property line. Is that correct?
Correct. And an important function of that entirety is to carry a parapet wall that will help accomplish some of the goals that I mentioned earlier of the blocking the noise and the sound, the noise and the visual pollution.
Gotcha. Okay, and so the little building that's there, that's proposed to be added onto, so that was on the site when the house was moved there?
Correct.
Okay. So it's not actually related to the historic house?
Neither the garage and the shed were just there, correct.
Okay. So I think that sort of my questions are coming from whether or not the design of the new building should be based on the existing structure that is not well related to the historic building. Does that make sense?
Well, I wouldn't say that they're very closely related. It's the location is tied into them and the scale, but not. I don't think that there's a lot left in the design of the existing shed in what is being proposed.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, it's sort of an interesting and kind of particular design with the pediment and the columns. But I just want to make sure I understand that this shed, it was existing on the site, and it is not related to the historic building that was moved to this location.
Correct, and it's explicitly a non-contributing structure in the landmarking of the property.
Okay, right. I saw that. Okay, so the design intent is just to sort of to be in keeping with what is there in terms of the shed, not necessarily the historic building.
Correct. It's I can leave it and not have any tree impacts, and I can use it to accomplish the goals of that I've been mentioning.
I understand. And as it's non-contributing, that makes perfect sense. I just wanted to be sure that I understood where some of the design intent was coming from. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Travis Bailey, you have anything that you want to ask or talk about here?
No, Jimmy mentioned a lot of the things in terms of I had the same concerns about what exactly we're supposed to be considering, since the house is historic. The site wasn't historic when the house was placed on it until it was recertified. So I think that's more of a discussion topic. No comments.
Okay, John Henshaw, you want to ask anything at this?
No, I'm looking at staff report. So the current landscape has no historic section with the house. He designated the garage outbuilding landscape elements that date back to 1960 ranch house are not significant and do not warrant preservation. So it's kind of like that whole thing has been eliminated. And to me, what our responsibility applies to the house, not the outbuilding, not the landscape, but to the house.
Right. But we don't, so as I view it, it's not that we have no obligation to mandate the preservation of those buildings, but on the other hand, no obligation to say they got to go either.
Yeah.
We're just looking at the plan and as to how that works with the house. And I would call everyone's attention, is at least to our discussion, to the applicant's presentation on the first page, where it says the historic landscape of a 500-acre plantation or even a 15-acre farmhouse cannot be replicated or mimicked in 0.46 acres. And I think that's sort of, we got to decide, are we going to try, or are we thinking that is a fact? And whatever it was at one time, it is a city structure today, and we'd be as well to look at it as that. And we're not even confined as much as we might be if the house was on Blunt Street. So thinking about it. Is there any other questions from members of staff, from the members to staff or to the applicant before I close the public hearing and we get on to the discussion? I'm seeing none. So I'll close the public hearing and we'll turn to discussion. And we can think about what needs to happen here. Obviously, the applicant's trying to screen this from the all the apartments that have sprung up all around there, and probably some noise that comes up from Wake Forest Road. So there are those concerns, and there's probably some consideration being given to where there's some sunlight and where there's not, in terms of what ought to go where. What do the rest of you have to say on it? Jimmy, you were waiting for discussion. What do you think?
Well, I find this very challenging, and I lean on the side that the house is important, and that things around the house should be in character. I have no presupposition about trying to create a new plantation there. In fact, I was almost inclined when I was looking at the front of the house to figure out whether we should in some way be responding to the neighborhood, because it does sit on a new street. It does have some character response, but we don't really step into that. So, I mean, it's an interesting piece. And having said that, it does sort of feel like there are various elements that are just being pushed into the plan. I mean, the knot garden's great. I think that's a great piece. I've already commented about the trellis areas and how that seems sort of like where I want to put it in the backyard rather than in the front yard. But at the end of the day, it's it looks like it's just an opportunity to do neat stuff around an important historic building. And in general, I find all the stuff that's done, there's a lot of attention to detail and so forth. I was initially, and I think this was a reaction to the Boundary Street discussion we had earlier, getting into this place about how many accessory buildings is too many. But then I realized that a plantation house would typically have multiple buildings. Farmhouses out in the country will have various outbuildings around them. So I'm not really struggling around how all that is done. I mean, overall, I think the challenge for me right now is, and I guess we can just allow staff to work with this, is to allow them to figure out how they're going to protect the trees that are under our purveyance. I mean, we certainly are vested with protecting trees that have that qualify, and so finding some balance in terms of doing this plan is really the critical piece to me.
All right, your thoughts, rest of you. Laurie, what are you thinking?
So I am getting a little bit hung up on altering these accessory structures, primarily in that they appear to be creating a false historical appearance. And that's really just, okay, so specifically the shed has this kind of portico Greek revival. It's not really, obviously it's not contributing. It was constructed sort of in relationship to itself and not the historic house. But what I'm concerned about is that by expanding on the existing structure and matching the design of that we do begin to create something that that appears to be, or that, we're sort of striving for the appearance of something that was historically there. That also extends to my concern about the garage. Definitely the design improves the appearance of the garage. I'm more inclined to, if those structures are going to be altered, to make them, the garage in particular, to make the garage maybe a little more kind of neutral, like something that can be separate and distinct from the historic house. And if the existing shed at the rear of the property were to remain, I am inclined to think that the design of whatever was built onto it would not necessarily sort of on that path of a kind of historical reference that isn't actually accurate. So I'm looking at staff comments, specifically C, the construction and alteration of accessory structures that create a false historical appearance is according to the guidelines mentioned. So that's where I'm getting hung up. I think that, the constructing new buildings on the site is not an issue for me at all. I know contributing. Specifically, my concern is the design.
Well, Laurie, let me respond and ask you, would you agree that the important thing here is, maybe 2 points, but the first one, most relevant to what you were saying, is that it'd be obvious to a tourist riding up in that cul-de-sac and turning around that this garage is not a part of the original historic house, and obviously we can try to tone down some of the detailing, but that as long as the tourists can tell, no, that's not original. Nobody's being fooled. Then that it's okay. And then my other comment, and then I'll come back to you, Laurie, is maybe what our mission is to try to look at this from the standpoint of presenting this important house in the most favorable light, given the circumstances and given the fact that we can't make a plantation out of this. So anyway, what are your thoughts in response to my comments, Laurie?
Well, I think that, yes, the existing shed and the new construction proposed along the rear property line, you really can't even see that from the right of way, right? So that's actually a little less, as we're sort of talking through this, I think that's a little less of a concern, but altering the existing garage to try and sort of dress it up with some features that it's the false historical appearance that is my concern. So I would welcome your comments.
All right, Mr. Team.
Yeah, so this is where I was afraid we're going to go. So, you know, and I understand that landscape can be a very fuzzy thing for people to deal with, but her argument about the building, I could make the same argument for the front yard of the house. I mean, I realize it's difficult sometimes for you to say, well, it's just empty space. That's not important. But the fact is that if you follow the applicant's argument about bringing in elements that are about or related to the house's original historic piece, that sort of not garden piece, it's not labeled that, but that's really sort of what is that cutting garden, and the other piece that he did with the orchard piece are not part of the original site. So that's where the dilemma comes for me. I mean, how do we balance that out? I mean, if you're worrying about putting a little couple of details on a building because it gives a false impression, well, the front yard is doing that completely.
Right.
I'm not disagreeing with one of you. But as far as that goes, I mean, I wonder if it presents better instead of putting trellises in the front yard. If it really presents better with a brick wall right by the curb, and then enclosing it in that way, and then see what you ought to put back behind it. I'm not sure.
But yet, if you go down that street, there's nobody with a brick wall along the street.
But I don't know that we give that much weight at all. We're not in a historic district. And if you go by my house, I mean, I got about 80% of all the trees on the entire block on my property, you know, and everything else is a tear down.
I agreed, and I would make that argument for the buildings in the backyard of this house.
Can I chime back in?
Yes.
Oh, please.
Okay, so I am looking at the National Register nomination. I'm on section number 7, page 17. So this says, the house has lost its integrity of location and setting due to its relocation. The move has preserved the integrity of the design, materials, and workmanship of, and that's why it is nominated to be individually listed. So the move to a nearby site also preserves the integrity of association by keeping the house on original plantation land and near the family cemetery. Okay, so the National Park Service justified and approved this move. And from that perspective, Jimmy, I think that sort of that relieves us of the responsibility to try to control what happens on the site to some degree. But again, I am looking at specifically, like if there were no if there were no changes proposed to those existing buildings on the site, it would not be an issue. The issue for me is that what is being proposed is that the garage specifically is being modified to look like it belongs to the building when it doesn't. And I think that is what staff has flagged in their report, and really is the only issue that I have with the application.
And I think I'm interpreting, and thank you for that. I think I am intending interpreting that the site and setting includes those buildings that were on the site when the house was moved there. That they don't all of a sudden become something special that we have to pay different attention to. And I think there's a dilemma that if you're going to treat the site at one level but treat the buildings at something else, then we've got two different things going on here. And I have a hard time rationalizing that we had a 1960s garage. It was a little plain. We want to dress it up. We got a front yard. We want to put a garden for cutting stuff in there, and we'd like to have it somehow, connect to the plantation idea. And having said all that with a lot of enthusiasm, I'm still muddled.
I am as well. I understand your position. I will say, especially since this building has been relocated, I am more concerned with the building and the disposition of other buildings on the site to the historic building. But I understand where.
I would love to hear from the other people that are on the screen.
All right. John Henshaw, why don't you speak up?
Okay, like I said earlier, the thing here that's historic is the house. It's not the lot. And the fact that it was originally part of the same plantation, that lot, to me is, it's totally insignificant. Nick made a good point. If I'm in town, I'm doing a little historic tourism, and I walk up to this and I see a house, which is obviously, I guess, a federal style. And then you look in the back and you've got the two little outbuildings, obviously Greek revival, and it remind me of the Petite Trianon. And I'm like, you're not going. I'm sorry, but I don't think that you're going to go, oh, look, that must have been original. That was, you're not creating a pseudo-historical context. Okay, these are obviously outbuildings. That is, Jimmy has said, outbuildings are common on plantations. Now, granted, a half an acre is not really a plantation, but so like I say, my focus. They're not altering the house. There is no plan to alter the house, and the landscape is coincidental. And I don't think that the addition of an arbor and two sort of Greek revival small buildings in the back will create a false historic context. That's.
All right. Travis Bailey, what are your thoughts?
So I echo a lot of people's comments. I'm hearing some I disagree with, some I agree with. To John's point, it is, in my mind, the house is the historic asset on the grounds. As Gary mentioned in the application, that it lost its historic setting when it was moved. I do echo Lori's concerns about elements on the property that could mimic being connected to the home historically. I wouldn't want, say, if the garage or accessory dwelling unit, I would want it to be clear and easy to differentiate between this is a historic landmark, this is something built after the fact. As to the grounds themselves, if we find ourselves referring to the surrounding landscape, to me that kind of automatically makes me think that that's an area I don't want to really touch. We're not in a historic district. It's impossible to recreate the landscape of a plantation home, as the applicant said, in that amount of space. So those are my thoughts. Main concern is anything built should not make it look like it is historically significant.
Well, so what I was sitting here thinking was about the one on Blunt Street that we did a few months ago, where because I think that this house is now a house in the city. It's an important house, but we just did well to abandon the plantation idea. And so I'm wondering if the front yard cannot be as well thought of as the front yard at the Second Empire on Hillsborough Street, or the wedding venue that was sort of a diagonal across from the governor's mansion on Blunt Street that we had not too long ago. And we just totally rethink how this does, and does that ultimately do a nice thing to enhance this historic house. And so I'm coming around to the view that okay, it may be so that the outbuildings need to be dressed down, and not try to make high fashion out of what was supposed to be a utilitarian garage. And but otherwise, I think my thought process would be to look at it more like the front yard at the Second Empire, or one of those wedding venues on Blunt Street, and as to what somebody might think was a useful way to approach. We just don't have the same amount of land as at Montford Hall or any of these others, so we need to think more like Blunt Street, because there's hardly any land we're left with this house. So those are some of my thoughts. Is there further discussion?
I would just add on to that, Nick. I think a point that needs, based on your examples, is that this is a residential property, and the other historic buildings you are referencing are commercial properties.
But we don't get into use, do we?
We do not.
It is a residential neighborhood, perhaps more than Blunt Street is at this time, but there are still people living on Blunt Street too.
That's true.
I know some of them. Further discussion?
Well, question. So, are there parts of the application that are approvable, and parts of the application that the applicant could work with staff to resolve some of the issues? Maybe staff can chime in on that.
I think if we're going to say that the garage building needs to be reworked, I think that probably needs to come back here. But that's my view. I don't know what the rest of you think. There's a lot here that probably can go, but in looking at that, if you all were comfortable, we could move ahead with sections A and B and put a pause on item C, which is about accessory structures.
Well, Nick, could we open it back up again and inquire with the applicant as to his position after hearing our discussion?
Well, I think we can certainly do that. And I'll accept that as a motion to reopen the public hearing. And one of you raise your hand, and we'll have a second of that, and we'll move that way. Okay, Travis Bailey seconds the motion. Mr. Henshaw, are you in favor? aye from him, a nod from Mr. Team, he's in favor. Mr. Bailey and Ms. Jackson are in favor. So we're back in the public hearing. And so with that said, Mr. Hobbs, I would call on you now to respond to the things that we have been wrestling with and tell us your thoughts vis-a-vis the landscape versus the buildings versus your timeline and whatever else you think we need to know.
So as you can imagine, I've got a lot of opinions about design and things, and it's sort of it's interesting to be on the outside of conversations about your own design. But I could say, to make things simple, if it were just about eliminating the garage from the conversation, it is not. The shed structures in the rear of the property are integral to the garden design. I would say the things we're trying to address with the garage are more about it just being ugly the way it is. So I'd be happy to set aside the garage as a separate application if we could move forward with everything else. But the general thing about the design is it's sort of one of those things with maybe it's the more you know about something, the less similar it seems. I mean, I can't imagine anything in the South from before the 20th century where you'd have a whole awful lot of buildings along the back like that. It seems much more like 20th century garden design or something to me. To me, it doesn't evoke anything about early architecture, but it is trying to use a vernacular classical vocabulary to carry across buildings. And that's all I'm trying to accomplish with the design.
All right. Any further questions for the applicant? Anything else you want to ask before I would close the public hearing? Mr. Team, we've lost the video on you. I'm not sure why.
Nick, may I ask a question of the applicant?
Please.
Okay, so I am much more concerned with the garage than the buildings along the rear property line, mainly because it is so it's so close to the historic building and so sort of I guess just the relationship.
Apologies, but I just missed the whole thing you said. I don't know why it keeps freezing up.
That's okay.
Restate that, please.
Sure. I was just saying, I think that the garage is more of a concern, basically because of the relationship to the historic building. And again, I understand why you would design an addition to the sort of Greek revival style kind of porch that is on that existing shed. Are you, so the design of the new buildings along that rear property line, is that sort of matching the new design to what is there? Is that an important sort of design concept for you? Did you hear that?
Mr. Hobbs? We seem to have lost him.
Okay, well, I'll just follow up and say, you know, again, that building in the rear, it is not contributing. And again, I do think it is less of a concern. What is designed as an addition to that, for what that's worth. Okay. Matt, are you here?
I'm not hearing him. I'm not. Mr. Hobbs?
So, according to the system, he's here and unmuted, but clearly there's something going on his end.
Right. Well, let me talk a minute and we'll see if he picks up again. But So Laurie, so we got two existing things back there. We have the cute little tool shed, and we have this garage carport thing. And is there? And I know the applicant would like something.
The applicant's back.
And a noise barrier on the back line. So the question, I guess, for me is, should we park all of the structures along the back line and just deal with the landscaping? But I feel sure that something needs to be put up for the privacy and the noise along the back.
Right.
Do you think that the other things being referenced in the back, aside from the tool shed and the garage, are fine and may as well move ahead if they want to do them?
I think after talking this through, the garage is the issue. The garage is what is being proposed to be altered. And the existing shed just is what it is. And so in addition to that, that matches the design of that shed, I do not think is as problematic as altering the garage to give it a more historical appearance. So I think Matt may be back, but I'm willing to make a motion excluding the garage from the application approval.
All right.
I am back, but I'm happy to, not have to respond to any of the other stuff if that's the direction you guys would like to go.
Well, we don't know where we'll wind up yet, but okay. We were debating the relative merits of these structures and their significance in this application against your need and desire for some visual and noise barrier along your boundary.
I would want to make the one design comment that the fact that this, I think almost humorous colonial revival shed structure has columns on it is coincidental. It is not, it has nothing to do with the design ethic that's being pursued.
Oh, I'm sorry. It has nothing to do with what?
The design of the proposed structure. The massing of the footprint of the building does, but the current porch on that shed, the fact that it has columns is coincidental to the design that I ended up with, that I proposed.
Okay, so I see the new shed and the existing shed as looking very similar in the shape of the portico, the columns. So is that?
No, the current one is it's a shorter building and it's just two columns over over an entryway.
I see.
Okay, are y'all you content now, folks? I need to close the public hearing and we need to see what we can do to move.
Okay.
It's 7:25 in case you weren't paying attention to that. All right, then I'm going to close the public hearing again, and Ms. Jackson, we're ready to try a motion. We'll see how far it goes.
All right. I move based upon the evidence that has been presented in the application and the additional information. And during the evidentiary hearing, the committee finds that the proposed work for implementing a master landscape plan, including construction walls, installing new planting beds. I'm sorry, I'm gonna rephrase that. Implementing a master landscape plan is not incongruous according to guidelines 1.3.1, 0.3, 0.4, 0.7, 0.9, 0.12, 0.15, 1.5.1, 0.5, 6, 10, 11, and facts 1 through 29. Further, the installation of fences and walls are not incongruous according to guidelines 1.3.1, 0.9, 1.4.8, 0.10, and facts 1 through 6. Kind of stalling out there.
All right. If you want to just stop there, or are you thinking that if you could fill out certain facts and let that be in a separate deed, the ones related to the garage. If you just want to put related to the garage, that would be numbers 1, 2, 3. They're about the garage.
I see. I'm going to attempt that. And further, the construction of, the alteration of an accessory structure. No, I'm sorry. Once more. The construction accessory structures is not incongruous according to guidelines 1.3.1, 0.6, 7, 9, 12, 1.6.6, 7, 8, 10, 11, and 12. And facts.
Can staff interrupt just 1 second?
Yes.
I have a suggestion that you could keep it the way it is. You don't have to pull out the garage just for the moment. You could deny the changes to the garage, and then he could come back later and apply again for the garage.
So Tanya, does that cost him a year?
No, not if he comes back with a different design. If he couldn't come back with the exact same thing.
Okay.
Would that be under this existing COA, or would he have to apply for a new major COA?
He would have to apply for a new major work COA, but that's what I heard him say anyway. The other thing is you could ask if he was amending it to remove it. That was unclear to me. Or you can try to make some machinations.
All right, well, let's get back to making the motion. So I'm just saying that you can leave all that in and then deal with whatever in the decision motion about what action we're going to take.
Yes, you would say that the alterations to the garage are incongruous.
Okay, should I try C again?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. The construction of accessory structures incongruous according to guidelines 1.3.1, 0.6, 7, 9, 12, 1.6.6, 8, 10, 12. However, the alteration of accessory structures that create a false historical appearance is incongruous according to guidelines 1.3.12, 1.6.12, and facts 1 through 15.
All right, now, but we'll get to discussion in a minute, but can I have a second so it's on the floor and we can deal with it? I need a hand. John, you second that? Okay.
All right, I can't, because I think we've gone far afield on this thing. And if it had been me, I would have just made the motion to approve it as it stands.
All right, we'll see about that. Travis, Bailey, you second?
I'll second.
All right, so the motion been made and seconded, and we'll now have a discussion, and Mr. Henshaw doesn't like the part about finding the thing in Congress, and so he's concerned. So, Mr. Team, what are your thoughts as regards not just the garage, but the trend of this as relates to the whole landscape idea?
I basically have come to the conclusion for myself that if we are giving carte blanche to the landscape, that site and setting, and I see the existing buildings that are there as part of it. And I don't see us treating existing buildings differently from the landscape. So I'm not clear whose camp I'm in, but I sound like I'm with John's camp. I feel like what was submitted is to me
All right. We've got a motion and a second, which generally allows the application to proceed except for the garage problem. On this particular motion here, that's what it would set up.
Nick.
And so, yeah, Mr. Henshaw, you got discussion?
I have a question for staff. If we approve this as it stands, would they be comfortable, and we had a condition that they have to approve any design of the garage? Would they be comfortable with that?
Would who be comfortable?
Staff.
Would we be comfortable? Okay. No.
Okay.
No, I think the design, because we're not hearing a consistent message from the commission. What I wanted to add is I'm not sure that the motion that Laurie made was exactly what she intended, because one of the other outbuildings in the back is getting altered as well, slightly. But it may be neither here nor there at this point.
But I think Laurie did say what she meant to say, because she wasn't that worried about the other little building. The garage was the problem, I think. But we've got, so back to where we are with the answer to John's question was that staff doesn't want the ball. And so we're going to be the ones dealing with this. It'll come back. We'll be dealing with this garage now, or we'll be dealing with this garage later. So, with that, is there any other discussion? You want to vote and see what happens to this motion? All right. I will call the roll then. Laurie Jackson?
Aye.
Travis Bailey?
Aye.
Jimmy Team?
no.
John Henshaw?
No.
I'm going to vote aye, and the motion will carry. And we'll let them get on with some of this, even though I'm pretty much comfortable with a lot of this landscape stuff. But if it doesn't relate to the setting and we're not supposed to really bog down with it, then I'm not even sure we had to pass on it. So, will you try for the motion?
I will. I move that the application for a certificate of appropriateness be approved, subject to conditions 1, 2, and 3. So Nick, I'm reading that as none of those conditions apply specifically to the garage.
Well, I think we'd be well to be clear about that. I would suggest you add an item 4 that the proposed modifications to the garage are not approved.
Okay. I accept.
All right. Will one of the rest of you second that motion? Travis seconds the motion. So the motion is to move forward with staff's findings except for taking the garage out. Discussion, John?
Since I've already made my feelings pretty well known on this and my thoughts on this, but if we're going to approve the application, are we going to deal with the rather large oak tree that's about 20 degrees off perpendicular that will come down?
Thank you.
Are we going to waive the 365-day delay?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's probably what we better do. Mr. Thames?
So thank you, John. I was going to head in that direction that, and this is similar to what we did for the Boundary Street house, JP's. Staff will work with the applicant to get the necessary information to remove the tree, and that there would be a requirement to plant a new minimum 3-inch caliper shade tree as a replacement for the tree to be removed. And then a separate item that the applicant will work with staff to prepare prior to construction a tree protection plan for those trees that are going to be impacted by the work.
That would be numbers five with a series of subsets to this motion.
If you want to do it that way, that's fine.
So
I accept.
4 with the garage, 5 with the tree.
This is Colette. Condition 3 asks for the drawings of the proposed accessory structures and arbor to be submitted as a subsequent COA. Is that what you still intend?
No. I don't think that's what was intended, but I didn't make that motion.
So is that a major works, Colette?
Colette here. That was the intention originally. In the initial submission of the application, there was only 2 elevation drawings, 2 rough elevation drawings included of that rear accessory structure. And we added that condition because we didn't feel that enough information has been submitted. But with the new information, you have elevation drawings of each side of the accessory structure. So there was substantial information included in his response to comments that I think satisfy what we would have been asking for in terms of siding, roofing, trim, window details. So I guess if you feel that you have enough information on that accessory structure, then I think that we're okay.
Okay.
That's
All right. So I think that it reads, to me, it sounds like it reads okay. What do the rest of you think? That the staff would get the details on the walkway and the brick and those things. And if they think they're okay on, then that'll be a short conversation.
Okay, so are you saying that 3 will remain and that the final drawings and details will come back for the garage and the proposed additions to the accessory structure? Or are you saying close out?
No, I was saying that that the staff take it from here on in number 3, but 4 was going to be that the garage is not approved.
So with that said, I think what Colette was trying to dance around is that y'all got new stuff in the addition, y'all received additional submittal, and that there is not a need to submit another COA.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
So I strike fact 3. I'm sorry, I strike condition 3 from the motion.
All right, so then we strike that. Number 3 and number 4 is the one about the garage. That would be renumbered as 3. And then number 5 would become number 4, and that would be about the tree. All right, so there's a motion, and Travis, I think you seconded that motion. And is there further discussion on the motion? Are we ready to vote? All right, I will call the roll. Ms. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
Mr. Team?
No.
Mr. Henshaw? I think he's saying, I'm reading his lips to say no.
Yeah.
All right, well, then I'll vote again, and I'll vote aye so we don't leave it in limbo. And so that will move forward. So the garage is out, and the staff can address the rest of this and move ahead with it. And we can all wonder whether we did the right thing. So the next application is 206 East Franklin Street in the Oakwood Historic District, John and Lana Siebert. And Mr. Siebert, if you will, I want you to be placed under oath, and so I will administer the oath now.
Because I'm not supposed to.
Do you and each of you swear or affirm that testimony you're about to give and the matter being heard before this committee be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
We do. We do. I do.
All right, I heard that from both of you, so we've taken care of that, and I would ask Tanya to put the pictures on the screen and Aaron to explain the proposal.
All right, this is Aaron. This is case COA 0048 2020 for 206 East Franklin Street in the Oakwood Historic District. The proposal is to construct a rear addition. This is a view of 206 East Franklin Street from the street. Another oblique view down the driveway and the side of the house. This is moving around towards the back of the house, a partial view of the west elevation and the existing rear deck. And this is a view of the full rear elevation. The proposed addition will be located generally where that existing deck is now. And moving around to the east elevation of the house. And a full view of the east elevation of the house. So the staff suggestion is to approve with conditions.
Okay, Mr. and Ms. Siebert, we'd like to hear from you, whichever one of you wants to speak, or both of you, and then tell us about your project and respond to the staff's comments. And I must say, I hope you haven't had many parties on that back deck, because there's a lot of personal injury cases could have happened there. No railing or anything.
Yes, we're looking forward to having that deck gone. We're proposing a small addition, a small sitting room addition to the rear of the house. We believe that the design is diminutive to the primary existing structure and is congruent with the historic guidelines. That's pretty much it.
Okay. Questions from members of the committee? I'm confused about the boundaries of the property, Mr. Siebert. On the drawing that you had, which I think is, I'm not sure what the page number is, looks like sheet 4, and you got a lay down area on there, and looks to me like is that on somebody else's property, or am I just not understanding the boundary?
The boundary, the driveway is shared and basically is basically right in the middle of that.
Right. So are the neighbors okay with you using that for your lay down area?
Yeah, we've already spoken to it. They're fine. Given that we have to share parking and we share all sorts of things between equipment, laying down, everything. We all kind of acknowledge that we live in a tight space.
Yeah. Okay, are there questions from members of the committee? None from Mr. Team. Mr. Henshaw, do you have anything? No? Laurie Jackson? Travis Bailey?
None.
All right, I saw Laurie nod her head no, but the speaker didn't work. So, any further discussion? I'll close the public hearing. Call on Mr. Henshaw to make a motion.
Okay. Based upon the information contained in the application, the staff's report, and the evidence and statements received at the hearing, I move that constructing a rear addition, installing solar panels, and removing a deck are not incongruous in concepts according to guidelines 1.3.1 through 1.3.14, 2.5.11, 3.2.1 through 3.2.12, citing facts 1 through 17.
Is there a second to that motion? Mr. Team's hand is up. He makes a second to the motion. And there's any discussion? I'll call the roll. Mr. Henshaw?
Yes.
Mr. Team?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
And I vote aye, and the motion carries. Do you have a follow-up motion, Mr. Henshaw?
I move that the application for certificate of appropriateness be approved, subject to, we have conditions in here. Subject to conditions 1 and 2.
Second.
There's a second by Mr. Team. In discussion, I'll call the roll. Mr. Henshaw?
Aye.
Mr. Team?
Yes.
Laurie Jackson?
Aye.
Travis Bailey?
Aye.
And I vote aye. And so that is approved. Ms. Siebert, you'll be dealing with staff moving forward from here. Thank you for being patient with us. Your project's moving ahead now. The next one is 1010 West Cabrera Street. Mr. Charles Wilkins. Mr. Wilkins, I'm going to administer the oath. I'll respond verbally after I do. You swear the testimony you're about to give the members of the committee in the matter being heard to be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right. And would staff explain the application?
All right, this is case COA 0049-2020 for 1010 West Cabrera Street. It is in the Boylan Heights Historic District, and this is a master landscape plan, which includes the removal of a retaining wall, the construction of a new retaining wall, the installation of new planting beds, the removal of a tree, and the change of exterior paint color. Next slide. This is a view of the front of the house from 1010 West Cabrera, of 1010 West Cabrera Street. You can see the retaining wall at the front there that is proposed to be taken down and then constructed in same location. Next slide. This is another view just a little further down the street. I'm showing you the front yard and that retaining wall. Next slide. This is the west retaining wall that is mentioned in the application to be restored. Next slide. This is a view of the west elevation, so just beyond where that west retaining wall just was. Next slide. And this is a view of the opposite side of the house, the east elevation. Next slide. This is the rear elevation. Next slide. And this is a view of the existing rear yard. Next slide. And just a slight turn there to get the rest of the rear yard. Next slide. And this is the existing shed mentioned in the application. Next slide. Staff's recommendation is to discuss the planting of yucca and needle palm in the front yard and the rear yard planting plan. And pending the results of that discussion, approve with conditions. Now, the recommendation and staff report were written based on the original application. So there has been new information submitted since then that included updated planting plans, the stone specification, and additional retaining wall and curb photographs.
Does staff have an opportunity to look at the new information provided?
Probably just as much as you have.
Okay.
Not too in detail.
Okay. Mr. Wilkins?
Yes, I'm here.
All right.
Chad.
Will you explain your application and your concerns and comments regarding the staff's comment?
Sure, I can do that. Basically, this is a master landscape plan to redo essentially the whole yard, front, side, and rear. I took into account their recommendations and changed the border plants across the front from less of a tropical feel and something more congruent with the neighborhood, which should be more of an azalea or an abelia, to kind of be in line with what the neighborhood is. And then, let's see, their other recommendation was we changed the stone pathway in the back to a mulch pathway. And we increased the size of the lawn area in the backyard per the recommendation. I would like to make it a little bit bigger, but there is a huge oak tree which pretty much shadows a large percentage of the yard. So I could pretend like I was going to have a yard, but it probably wouldn't turn out to be much. So we increased it off of the back of the house as much as we felt was viable, and then continued planting through the remainder of the yard, going to the back property line. In terms of the retaining wall, I was having a hard time finding the correct stone to match, but I found a place that sells, I guess it's called Broughton Brown, which essentially mimics the Broughton High School stone, and it does match what I was trying to accomplish, was to match the original wall, which is still visible on the western side, and then bring that all the way across the front. And so I think that that material that I provided pictures of would do that. They also asked me to retain their two brick pillars on either side, one on either side of the steps entering, and I would keep that. And I think that was the majority of it. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Mr. Team has questions.
Sure.
For sure, you put a lot of work into this. Thank you very much. I'm trying to track what changes you made with the new plan versus the old one.
Sure.
And I see that you modified some things in the front to address staff's comments. Very good. I did notice that you were, in the original plan, you were keeping a crepe myrtle, which looked to me and be in excellent condition out front, and we're planting a red bud, and you've now gotten rid of the crepe myrtle, replaced it with a dogwood, but no tree in the other lawn area. Can you talk about that?
So the crepe myrtle that is currently in the location where the dogwood would be is in okay condition. It's more of like it's growing like a shrub. And my neighbors actually had just planted a crepe myrtle not, 15 feet away, which is going to open right up next to it. So I was attempting to provide a little bit of variation there, since that crepe myrtle really hasn't been there that long. There had actually been, before I owned the house, a much larger tree there that had died, and the previous owner just put that in. I'm open to keeping the crepe myrtle. It's probably, I don't know, 6 feet tall, maybe at most. So I was just, before it got much larger, I was just looking at creating a little variety in the neighborhood. But I'm open to keeping it if that's a recommendation.
Well, actually, I was more thinking about the fact that I like the idea you had a small tree in each lawn space.
We looked at that, and one thing that was required, is nice to have, is I have a yard in the front. And when you put trees in, of course, all the grass goes away because you have a tree that's essentially shading that whole space. So, and that's also, there's a shared driveway or abandoned alley. And I didn't want that to start infringing on the entry kind of into the house, because it is a rental, and so the tenants would actually park sometimes in that space and then walk across the yard to the steps. And so I was just trying to keep that space visually open, but I'm open to suggestion.
I was just curious. I mean, it felt like it was balanced to have a tree on either side. I don't have a guideline to cite to tell you to put it back. It was just interesting. And just as a piece, whether you're going to do this or not, I did take a look at the crepe myrtle. I think it was my remembrance, and I don't think you've got a photograph of it.
There is. Let's see, where did it go? You can barely see it in the second picture, view from West Cabrera, is kind of on the southern, or the second picture. You can barely see it right there in the foreground. There's not any leaves on it because this was taken in the winter.
Yeah. I mean, and one of the, just as a recommendation, one of the comments I'd make is that clean up the base and reduce the number of trunks, it'll begin to look like a nicer tree. That being said, I don't think it's big enough for us to regulate. So we're going to move on. Just to let you know that I like the pairing, and I like the idea that you were keeping the tree. I want to move to the back. I want to move to the backyard. You made a comment that that sort of had a mystery. You said you had responded to the 50% of lawn or ground cover area in the backyard, which was staff's comment. And I'm looking at the two plans, and I mean, that 50% increase would have been in a substantial area in the backyard, and I don't see where that is.
I agree. And what I tried to do was, at first, if you look at the first picture, the amount of open area right up the back of the house was much smaller. We doubled, at least doubled that, if not more, that space to make a lawn there, and then change the stone pathway to mulch to, I don't know if that is considered open, but I guess what I was trying to say is that the oak tree that you can kind of see that's at the end of the alley is a very large oak tree, and essentially overhangs at least half, if not 3/4 of the yard. And then my neighbor also has a very large oak tree. And so between those two, that backyard doesn't get a large amount of sun, except kind of right along that left fence line. So what we were trying to do is just, I could say 50% lawn, but it's just not going to grow, I guess is my point.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, when you were developing this plan for the backyard, because you've got a lot of shrubs.
Yeah.
And so did you have some image that you were going through this process? Because a lot of the space is going to be filled, right? I mean, it's going to be a very dense planting in the backyard of material that's probably going to be easily waist or chest high if all these plants mature.
Yes. So the idea was to kind of create more of a social space closer to the house, and then a separate space where the fire pit would be kind of in the top corner, and then the shed would also provide some extra storage for the tenants there. It was more for just if you were spending time behind the house, it would be a nice visual looking out, because I guess along that back fence, you're probably aware on the other side of that is I don't even know what you call it, like a big construction area. And I don't know what it's going to be in the future, because eventually one day that'll probably be developed. So I'm kind of looking ahead into the future thinking, well, if there's a little more scale going back towards that fence, that might give me some protection later on. But
okay,
once again, I mean, we're just trying to provide some visual interest for, the people that are living there.
I'm just, and this is just in the comment. So this is not a kid's backyard, right?
No, that is
okay.
Not.
Just want to clarify that. So a question about, because you go up a hill a bit at the back.
Yeah, it kind of slopes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is okay. What I'm curious about is that the fire pit is close to a southern red oak, which you've got shown on your plans. You didn't identify it as a southern red oak. Are you planning to basically put that on grade?
It would probably be dug down a little bit, but the oak tree itself, the branches are really high.
Okay. So just know that I'm going to ask that staff work with you on a tree protection plan for both these oak trees.
Sure. That's not a problem.
Great. Thank you. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Are there other questions for the applicant from anybody? You got anything, Travis?
No, sir.
John Henshaw?
No, I'm good. When I saw this and I was looking at it, I'm going, these people are going to love to do gardening. They love to do gardening.
Okay, if there's nothing else, no questions for staff, I'm going to close public hearing and we'll go to discussion internally. Any question or comment?
I had the stone proposed for the wall replacement. Both of these houses are very close to my own home, and I noticed one of the examples cited was 1016 West Cabrera. I feel like we've gone back and forth on things like this before with stone material being replaced. Do we typically require, if possible, for them to replace, like if the stone is still intact, put it back with new mortar, or do we allow for completely new stone to be used?
Well, it was pretty bad to me, but I don't know the answer to that question. I'll ask staff well, first of all, I think, Travis, the first thing you do is you have to figure out the best you can tell, is it original? I'm not sure what we do about walls, but the thought process is it original as part of the period of significance for the house? I guess it's possible it could have achieved significance at a later time, but here I believe the applicant said that the so-called Broughton stone around on the side is what is original, and he's trying to go back with that rather than whatever got put in the front at some later time. But I'll, Tanya or Colette, if you want to answer our question, please do.
This is Colette. I was looking through the staff report. I did not include it, so I am fairly confident that the report does not mention the wall as being one of the historic features. from what I did include, I found a photograph in the file from shortly after the district was designated that shows, in writing the report, I was more concerned with the brick piers on the walkway than the west stone wall, because the brick piers are easily evident that they belong to the style of the house. So if you wanted to include a condition that the applicant attempt to reuse the stone, you can certainly do that. But if I would make sure to include something that if the stone is not reusable, then it can be replaced. I don't know how you would monitor that, but
I don't think that's necessary. I think you've answered my question.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, any other questions, any discussion from members of the committee? Frankly, I think if we could go back with the Broughton stone, we've done a good deed, and that the front was not referenced as part of the original fabric at the time the district was created. Then we have relative freedom to allow the property owner to do something better.
Agreed.
All right. So that said, Travis, you want to try a motion?
I knew this would happen if I talked too much. I move, based on the information contained in the application, staff's evaluation, and evidence presented at the public hearing, installing a master landscape plan, including installing new planting beds and changing paint color, is not incongruous in concept according to guidelines section 1.3.1.2.3.7.8.9, 1.4.11, 1.5.5, 2.4.3. However, installing a planting bed. Oh, stop
you
it.
leave that part in there or stop right there?
Stop right there.
And
the following and suggested in the facts presented 1 through 17. B, the removal of a retaining wall and construction of a retaining wall are not incongruous according to guidelines 1.3.1.2.4, 1.4.1.2.5.6.11. And the facts 1 through 9.
Y'all heard the motion. Is there a second to that?
Second.
All right, Laura Jackson seconds the motion. Any discussion? I'll call the roll. This team, you got something?
Yes, I'm just trying to keep up with a couple of things. First of all, there was an amended application. There was additional information that should be added in. 8. It says one new tree is also proposed it says east. It's actually proposed for the west side of the front yard, replacing a crepe myrtle.
Okay.
All right.
And also,
I'm not done.
go ahead, Timmy.
I'm looking.
Go ahead.
Looking to see if there was a reference for the yuccas and so forth in the front yard, but I'm not. Hold on.
There is. It's number 7.
Take it away. Well, then we get rid of that. Get rid of number 7 because the new plan doesn't show those.
Well, right. And the new plants, the reference was azalea or abelia.
Correct.
the last half of number 7 does note that there's currently one. I mean, this was Colette, by the way. That still exists. I don't know if it's relevant, but.
No, I think you go ahead and that's the one in the backyard. Let's leave that. So just strike the first sentence in number 7 and leave the second.
Okay. Everybody understand that?
Yes, and I accept.
All right. Anything else? I'll call the roll. Mr. Henshaw?
Aye.
Mr. Team?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
And I say aye. And Mr. Bailey, you got a follow-up motion with regard to the COA?
I move that a certificate of appropriateness be approved and issued with the following conditions. That the brick piers at the front walk entry not be removed, and conditions. I have to read for each condition or just do 1 through whatever?
I think you can do 1 through whatever.
All right, 1 through 5.
Mr. Team?
A second, and I have a couple of them. I want to propose that number 2 be amended, so that at least 25% of the rear yard have a longer ground cover material.
Please repeat, you're breaking up. Could you say that again?
That number 2 is changed from 50% to 25%. That we add a condition 6 that a tree protection plan for the 2 oaks be submitted and approved to staff prior to the issuance of the blue placard.
All right. And Travis, you okay with the amendment?
I accept the friendly amendments.
Okay. Any discussion?
Tanya jumping in, just to make sure that you were making your motion on the amended application.
Yes. So I'll call the roll. Mr. Henshaw.
Aye.
Mr. Team.
Aye.
Ms. Jackson.
Aye.
Mr. Bailey.
Aye.
And I vote aye. So that carries it, and that concludes that matter. Thank you for coming, Mr. Wilkins. Thank you for being patient and sticking with us and looking at that speaker for 3 hours. You are done, and you can deal with staff from here. So, folks, we don't have to do anything with 517 South First, and that one is deferred. And we don't have to do anything with 1203 East Lane Street either. But there's one more thing. When we had the business meeting, I mentioned that I wanted to save a little bit of time, and of course we should have. If we haven't saved much time, it'd be an 8:13 on my computer. But I wanted to begin a discussion about how we go about enforcing these things. And
Nick?
Yes.
Before you get too far, we still need to approve the minutes
Yes, ma'am.
and acknowledge the minor works, but mostly the minutes.
I think we mentioned the minor works, but yes, with respect to the minutes, to be sure we get that done. Everybody have a chance to look at the minutes of last month's meeting. Now that we dealt with the one on Boundary Street, maybe we have a little bit less concern. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the May 28th meeting?
So moved.
Second.
That was Mr. Henshaw moved and Mr. Team seconded. I'll call the roll on that. Mr. Henshaw?
Aye.
Mr. Team?
Aye.
Ms. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
And so the minutes are approved. Thank you, Tanya, for letting me forget that. I rode by the Rothstein house on Williamson Drive at lunchtime today, and it's emblematic of why we need to have a little bit of discussion here. There was a retaining wall that was part of the original fabric that the people just blew away, and they've got pine straw there, and there's no sign there was ever a wall there at all. And so I think we need to have some discussion here about what happens after we go to all this trouble to fashion these motions. What is the process for seeing to it that the conditions get carried out or not? And then so if we could, in the interest of time, if we could just talk about how it works now, maybe we'll stop there for tonight. And then next month, maybe we'll talk about giving it some thought and thinking about what else is needed, if anything. But Tanya, if you and staff could just talk about a little bit about how we go about knowing that stuff really did happen, we know we have some people that bootleg stuff in without a COA, but do we have stuff that the people with a COA proceed to blow off and not do, and how do we know?
So Tanya here, I'll start off and then feel free to jump in, Colette or Aaron, if you want to add something. So the first thing, of course, that happens is anything that's approved with conditions, prior to the blue placard, we do make sure that they do fulfill those conditions before they receive their blue placard, the blue placard being what they need in order to obtain any other permits. For most of the projects, after they meet the conditions, we don't hear anything about it until they call in and say they're done. And then we have a lovely backlog of inspections where we go out and check to make sure that, it was done like it was supposed to. For some projects, and this is where I'm a little fuzzy, I know it's new construction and it might be additions also, it might not. We do have the opportunity through their building permit process to look at the drawings that they submit for what to build and make sure that the location and the drawings that they submit for permitting matches what was approved for the COA. Other than that, it is the way we know it's somebody calling to say something wasn't happening the way they observed. This is that partnership between the neighborhood and the commission. For most items, there's less of an issue of not doing something, because just because it gets approved in a COA doesn't mean they have to do it unless it was integral to the decision to begin with or it's a condition. So say they apply, you put on addition and do the garage, they can just do one or the other. They don't necessarily have to do both. So right now, the system of making sure that they do what they're supposed to is largely the honor system. Anything to add to that, Colette?
I could add particular information about this property, but I don't know if it's...
I don't think it's relevant to today.
Yeah.
We don't have to go there on any particular one of them. That one I knew was an example that we probably can't let go and shouldn't let go. But and we can talk about that. But so somebody can not do because they got a COA for it, but that doesn't mean they got to do it. And I think, and we don't have any heartburn about that. But if it's when they go and do something totally different, is there anything other than zoning that stops them from adding 3 feet to the new den or bathroom on the side or back of the house?
No, there's not. Now, we have made some changes over the years, and again, largely any of this is building related. One for I'm going to make up 5 years ago because that's my go-to. It may have been 8 years ago. We had several cases where people ordered incorrect windows for their addition or the new construction, and we found out whether on inspection or somebody complained. I'm not sure what the case is. And as a result of that, that's why we now have windows being something that to be submitted before they get their blue placard so they don't get ahead of themselves accidentally. So
folks, what we got here is we got staff that's working hard. We got board members that are dedicated, but we're depending a good bit on honor system, and we're not getting much help out of inspections with regard to the things that we do. And so I think I'll leave it at that unless some of you want to say something, and just think we ought to come back next month having ridden around a little bit and having thought about this. You know, with the resources we have and with the budget going to be tight, maybe tighter, how do we go about assuring that we didn't waste our work in this process? So let's plan for a little bit of elbow room to talk about that, maybe when we're not quite as beat down and tired as we are now tonight. Okay. I think we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to the people who think we're doing this job that we give this some thought in our process.
Agreed.
Okay. And with that, those of you that hadn't already sneaked out to the refrigerator to get a beer, we'll declare this meeting adjourned. And thank y'all for the time, and we will see you soon. And I hope this virtual thing does not become permanent, but I'm certainly not optimistic right now. So y'all take care.
All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye. Have a good night.
Bye now.
Stay safe.